Have you ever, like, really stopped and thought about how one wrong move at work, I mean, one single step, could just totally turn your world upside down?
Oh, absolutely.
One minute you're just, at your desk doing your thing, and the next you're facing, like, a mountain of medical bills, right?
Yeah.
And you're wondering how are you going to pay rent, how you're going to get through this. It's wild. And that's exactly what workers' compensation is. Like, it's supposed to be there for those unexpected moments.
Yeah, it's meant to be that safety net, you know what I mean? For everyone involved, really.
Right.
For the employee, it's about getting the care you need without stressing about the bills and having some income coming in while you're healing. And then for the employer, it protects them from lawsuits and helps keep everything running smoothly.
Totally. It's like, on paper, it sounds like the perfect system, right? It's like, okay, we got this figured out.
Right.
But I have a feeling, and I'm sure our listeners do too, that it's way more complicated in the real world. Like, especially here in Georgia. Don't we have, like, our own specific rules and all that?
Oh, yeah. We're going to unpack all of that today as we take this deep dive into Georgia workers' compensation. We're going to look at attorney Laura Lanzisera's work, and hopefully, by the end of this, you'll see why having someone like her on your side can be a real game changer, if you ever find yourself in that situation. And you're right, it can get really complicated. See, in Georgia workers' comp, it's actually the law for most employers. So if you get hurt on the job, they have to provide coverage. This covers stuff like your medical expenses, getting you back on your feet with rehab, and even a portion of the income you would have earned while you're unable to work.
Interesting.
But actually navigating all the ins and outs of the system to make sure you're getting everything you're entitled to, that's where it can get a little, very tricky.
Okay, so this is where my ears perk up, because it seems like even with this system in place, there are still potential pitfalls. So can you give us an example, a real-world example of how this seemingly straightforward system could become, complicated?
Okay, so imagine this. You're at work, right? And you injure your back.
Oh, man.
Happens all the time, right?
Yeah.
So you file for workers' comp and you're like, okay, this is what it's for.
Right, like this should be straightforward.
Exactly, that's what you think, right. But then your claim gets denied. Or they offer you this settlement and it's like way too low.
Ah, the worst.
And that's when you realize, oh, okay, I need to understand all these details. And more importantly, you need somebody who can, go up to bat against these insurance companies.
Yeah, you need someone who speaks their language, right? Someone who knows the rules of the game. And that's where, if I'm not mistaken, Laura Lanzisera comes in, right?
Yeah.
And what I found so interesting about her is that she didn't start out representing injured workers, did she? She was on the other side, the insurance company's side.
Right. She was defending insurance companies for 5 years, actually.
Wow.
So she was really immersed in that world, learning all their tactics, understanding their strategies. And she saw firsthand how they approach these cases.
Oh, that's so interesting.
Which is invaluable when it comes to then representing injured workers.
It's like she has that insider knowledge, right?
Exactly.
She has the secret decoder ring to understand how they think and operate.
Precisely, yeah.
And then in 2005, she makes this decision, right? She switches sides.
She does, yeah, and dedicates her career to helping injured workers, the people who really need it.
It's one thing to know the law.
Right.
Right. But it's another thing entirely to understand all the little nuances, all the things that could trip you up, and all the ways that, I don't know, it seems like insurance companies might try to, minimize a claim or make it difficult.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And that's what her background allows her to do. Anticipate those challenges, build stronger cases for her clients. So it really levels the playing field, which is really important.
It makes you wonder, how many people out there are getting caught up in that? Not realizing that there's this whole other level to it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I think is so fascinating. It's not just a cool backstory, right? This background that she has, it translates into actual benefits for her clients.
And speaking of specifics, her firm, they don't just handle any workers' compensation case, right? They specialize, which I always find interesting.
You're right, they do.
What's that all about?
Well, they specialize because, workers' comp cases can get really complicated.
Right.
And not all injuries are the same.
Right, like a paper cut versus, something major.
Exactly. So the legal strategy has to match that.
Right. Okay, that makes sense.
It has to adapt.
So when you say specialize, what are we talking about here?
So, for example, on her website, they list a range of practice areas. You've got your traumatic brain injuries.
Right, which are, we know, incredibly serious.
Catastrophic injuries, back and neck injuries, all that.
Yeah.
But
then there were a couple that stood out to me.
Okay. What were those?
One was shoulder injuries, and they actually have like a whole section,
Really?
yeah, that explains the anatomy of the shoulder.
See, now that's interesting. You don't see that every day on a lawyer's website.
No, you don't, and there's a reason for that. Shoulders are really complicated. You know, you've got like 3 major bones in there, a whole bunch of tendons and muscles and ligaments.
I never really thought about it, but yeah, it's very intricate.
It is. It's a very delicate system. And if you've ever hurt your shoulder, you know how debilitating it can be.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
You know, even little things.
Right, and how those limitations, even if it seems minor at first, can really have a domino effect on, your ability to work, your ability to just do everyday things.
Exactly. And what really stood out to me on their site was how they broke down the impact of, say, like a rotator cuff tear. So common in the workplace.
Absolutely.
And they talk about how even minor tears, they can make it really hard to do your job. Like if your job requires any lifting or reaching or carrying, that can be almost impossible.
And those are such common movements in so many professions, it's incredible.
Oh, it is. It is.
So having a lawyer who understands that, not just the legal stuff, but like how it actually plays out in your life,
Yeah,
that's huge.
absolutely.
Okay, so shoulder injuries, that's one. What was the other one that stood out to you?
The other one was psychological injuries.
Oh, wow. See, I wouldn't even thought about that. Those are covered under workers' comp, too.
They are, and you're right, people don't talk about that as much.
It's like we assume it's just the physical stuff.
Right, exactly.
But workplace injuries, they're not always visible, are they?
No, they're not. And think about the emotional impact of some of these things that can happen at work.
Oh, absolutely.
Like imagine if you witness some kind of horrific accident or you're a victim of violence at work.
It's traumatic.
It is traumatic, and that can lead to, very real mental health conditions, PTSD, anxiety, all of that.
And just like, Lanzisera digs deep into the complexities of a shoulder injury, she also recognizes that not every workplace injury is going to be something that you can see, right? Like it's not always a broken bone or a cut.
Yeah.
So how does that work in terms of workers' comp? I'm really curious about this.
Okay, so for instance, let's say you're working construction.
Okay.
And there's like a scaffolding collapse, right?
So, man.
Scary, right?
Yeah.
So you manage to escape, and physically you're okay, maybe a few bumps and bruises, but nothing major.
Okay.
But then you develop this intense fear of heights.
Of course.
Which makes sense, right? That's a very normal reaction to that kind of event.
Trauma.
Exactly. But now you can't go back to work.
Right.
So it impacts, your livelihood, your well-being. And Lanzisera's site, they actually highlight cases like this, where they fought for workers who are experiencing, maybe panic attacks or flashbacks, insomnia, and it's all stemming from something that happened at work.
It's so important to acknowledge that trauma can show up in so many ways.
Right.
And to have someone who gets that,
Yeah.
who knows how to advocate for you for those things that you can't necessarily see.
It's crucial. You're right. It's crucial.
It's like you were saying earlier, it's not just about being familiar with the law. It's that understanding the impact this has on a human being, like on a real person,
Oh, absolutely.
And that actually leads me to something I wanted to ask you about, the testimonials on Lanzisera's website.
Okay.
Because I always think those are so interesting to look at.
Yeah.
And there were a few things that I noticed that people kept saying, about their experience with her firm.
Oh, interesting. Okay. What stood out to you?
Well, one of the big ones, people really appreciate her personalized approach.
Okay.
It's not just like you're a case number.
Right.
It's like she takes the time to listen, which I'm sure is so important.
Oh, absolutely.
When you're already feeling overwhelmed.
Especially in these situations. Yeah.
People talked about how she explains things clearly and really makes them feel seen and heard, which, I think is huge when you're going through something challenging.
And remember we talked about how complicated the system is. So
Right.
having someone who can walk you through that, answer your questions patiently.
Make you feel comfortable. Yeah, like you're not, being talked down to.
Exactly. Exactly.
And something else, I thought this was really interesting.
Okay.
A lot of the testimonials, they mentioned how upfront she and her team,
Right.
about their caseload.
Interesting.
Like, even if it means saying, hey, we're at capacity right now.
Right.
You can't take this on. And to me, that says so much,
It really does.
Because it's like they're prioritizing quality over quantity,
Absolutely. They're not just rushing through
It's not a factory.
Yeah.
They're really trying to give each client the attention that they deserve.
to get the best outcome.
Yes, exactly. And that really comes across because you've got people saying, Like, she went above and beyond,
Yeah.
She helped me get this treatment, or she negotiated this thing with the insurance company. Even just checking in on them after the case is settled, it's like, she gets it.
Right. She sees the bigger picture.
It's not just a job for her, right?
Yeah.
It's like she actually cares.
Yeah, it all goes back to that client-lawyer relationship, that foundation of trust. You're dealing with the aftermath of this injury. It's not just about, legal knowledge.
Right, you need that support.
You need someone who's going to fight for you, who understands what you're going through.
Yeah, physically, emotionally, all of it. It's a lot.
It is a lot. And so to kind of bring everything together that we've talked about today, we've really gotten into the nitty-gritty of workers' comp in Georgia, and we've seen how a lawyer like Laura Lanzisera, she can be such an advocate.
An ally, really.
Yeah, exactly. So here's something I want you to think about. How can understanding your rights and finding the right person in your corner, how can that empower you? Not just in, the legal world.
Right.
But in your own recovery. Like, how can it help you get back to a place of feeling whole again?
That's such a powerful question, and I think it's a perfect note to end on. Because at the end of the day, it's not just about the money, right? It's about getting back on your feet, feeling like you have the support that you need, and moving forward with confidence. And that's what it's all about, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Knowing your rights, knowing that there are people out there fighting for you, and that sometimes that can make all the difference in the world.